Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. My name is Randall Richmond, and I'm the Director of Athletics here at Kent State University and a proud graduate of the NCAA Charles Wickham Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute helped me refine who I was as a man well before focusing on who I was as an administrator. Within the program, I developed lifelong friendships, colleagues, and confidants to help me discover my true purpose in this profession, which is to be a transformational leader that has a positive impact on people's lives well beyond sports. And as the great orator Big Sean often says, the energy you give is what you manifest. Peace.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Eric Hyman. Eric is the former director of athletics at VMI, at Miami of Ohio, TCU, South Carolina, and Texas A&M University. Greetings, Eric. Thanks for joining us again.
Sure, Ty. Glad to visit with you.
Now, Eric, I wanted to have you on. Of course, you 47 years in college athletics, 28 years as a director of athletics. Of course, what you're doing now is some consulting, helping people solve problems, right, in terms of leaderships, in terms of athletics directors and coaches and those kind of things. I wanted to have you on because I want to, I've talked to a lot of athletic directors and a lot of leaders, and a lot of people talk about core values, and they talk about a number of different things that they try to put in place when they get to a leadership role. And I needed some clarity. So I want to know if I can run some definitions by you that I've come up with, and you can tell me if I'm off base or how it applies to athletics or just any type of direction you can give me on these type things. You okay with that?
Sure. I'll be glad to.
Excellent. Well, I think now years ago, I talked to Dutch Bachman, who used to be over the 1A Athletic Directors Association, and he told me everything starts with purpose. And the way he defined it was that the purpose is a simply stated statement which explains why an organization exists. And I took that and I said, okay, so you're basically telling people why we do what it is that we do. Am I off base with that definition?
Why we do what we do.
Right.
Yeah, I think Dutch is right. I mean, what is your purpose? And in athletics and college athletics, I've always felt that you want to create. It's about educational opportunities for young people through athletics. That's one of your purposes, and
right.
Also to provide entertainment and esprit de corps for your student body, your school alumni, and for your extended for the community, extended community and beyond. Right. I mean, this is what the primary purpose is young people. I mean, that's why we're in the business. So, and it is an institution of higher learning. So you want to be able to help these young people be able to get their degrees, and your purpose needs to be there.
Right.
But also is to provide, like I said, the entertainment and esprit de corps for your student body, your alumni and your extended family and all those kind of things, is to create a lot of interest towards your institution.
Right. I once heard a president, she used the term that athletics was to enhance the academic mission of the university. That's one of the purposes or the purpose of athletics.
Well, I found it very fascinating when I got to TCU in 1998. They had 1,600 openings with 3,700 applications.
Wow.
And then the year after they went to the Rose Bowl, they had like 1,800 openings in the freshman class, and they had 20,000 applications.
Oh, wow.
And so I talked to the dean of admissions, Ray Brown, and I asked him about that. And he said, I said, why? He said, what's different? I said, well, obviously your success athletically, and at TCU there's a good message, and athletics, academically there's a great message, and athletics has been able to get it in every nook and cranny around the country. That's why you see one of the reasons why the admissions has just skyrocketed at TCU, plus the fact that they had a good model in the first place. They were doing a lot of things, but they got the exposure through athletics. So that's one of the purposes a viable college athletic program can do for a university.
Right. Of course, your experience, public, private, large, medium, small, military institution, is there a variation of that in terms of the purpose of athletics on campus when you're talking about higher
Yeah,
education?
I think you tweak it, but then I really think you go back into your core values and your culture.
Okay.
But it's that. I mean, ultimately, that would be applicable to all the schools that I have worked with. Is that educational opportunity for young people?
Right.
And if we're not doing that, then why are we in college athletics?
Right.
You've got to help prepare them for later on in life. I think all schools do that. Now, obviously at VMI, the mission's a little bit different because you have the military aspect. And obviously at a state-supported school, it's a little bit different. So the purposes vary, but the core of what I'm saying to you, as far as, in my opinion, what the purpose is, I don't think it varies that much.
Okay, right, exactly. But when you talk about the values, right, and I'll move on to my next definition here, and because you brought up values, and this is probably where things can vary depending on the culture of institution. So, in terms of value, I have what one deems to be correct and desirable in life, especially regarding personal conduct. And I'll take that to the next one, which ties in, which is values, plural, is a collection of guiding principles that one deems to be correct and desirable in life, especially regarding personal conduct. What are your thoughts on those definitions with regard to athletics?
Well, I really like your definition of value. It's the collection of guiding principles that one deems to be correct and desirable in life, especially regarding personal conduct. I think value, if you go back to value,
yes, sir,
and you try to define value in athletics, it comes from the word valuable. It's a behavior that is valuable for a person or a culture. And for example, let's say hard work is valuable, and then you have for an athlete hard work on the field of competition, but you also have hard work that is pushing yourself in the classroom. So there are all kinds of values in a culture, and sometimes there's a disconnect with the values. And that's why you've got to, in my judgment, what you have to do is when you get into a new organization, you have to sit down, define what your purpose is, and you have to have a cross section of people in the department to do that. And then you've got to do the same thing. What are your core values? And that's got to be reflected on the organization. So your values build up to what your core values are, and you need to determine that. But it's what's valuable for a person or in a culture. What do they think is very important for their culture, and what do they think is very important? I think that's what a value is, and that's what values are.
Right. And so when you add on the word core, right, you add core to values. Values being, I'll read it again, a collection of guiding principles that one deems to be correct and desirable in life, especially regarding personal conduct. When you talk about core values, and my assumption is that you add the word core on it, meaning these are the things that don't change. We are rooted in these. And the definition I have for that is a formalized definition of an organization's culture, usually in the form of a list of terms which describe the desirable attributes of the culture. Now, that may be a little technical, but I'm trying to understand the core values and the values in terms of how you tie the terminology together, right?
Well, yes, and it goes back to you got to determine what your core values are, and then at that point in time, then you don't have a lot of deviation. I think developing your values, you got to. What are you? You're in the framework of an educational institution, and you've got to have these guiding principles, that sort of the desired outcomes. No matter what you're doing, you're always following the principles.
Right.
It's not like situational. I'll do it here and I won't do it there. No, you've got to be able to. All your decisions need to be based on what the core values are. And I know when I got to South Carolina, some of the core values we just had to be redefined by people in the department, and then all of our decisions were made based on the core values. And if we weren't, then we hadn't done the right. We haven't done the right things. I know when I interviewed somebody or I brought somebody into the department, I always went over those, and so there was no surprises. So they knew what the expectations that they were, and they knew what we were trying to accomplish and trying to do. Because you've got to reflect the values of a university, And as an athletics, it's imperative because we're part of one of the most visible entities of an institution. So you want to be able to reflect it. But those core values to me, the purpose and your core values to me are very, very important.
Right.
And you've really got to get a commitment from people in the athletic department to do that. But those, and then later on in your time frame there, you got to make your decisions based on those.
I wonder, in terms of the institutions where your career led you to, as a leader, my assumption, as you grow in your career, you'll you find your personal values that you lead yourself with, right?
Right.
You obviously have a purpose for doing what you do as a person, but now you get into a leadership role, and you're somewhere for 6 to 7 years. You go to the next place 4, 5, 6, 7 years, however many years, and
right.
You're changing the values of the organization, but they also have to tie into who you are as a leader. Tell me about how that operates, especially for you who has been at a wide range of institutions, public, private, military, big time, that kind of thing.
Well, Ty, when I was approached by an institution, and there was some interest in me becoming their athletic director, one of the things I always did, I said, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and this is what I represent.
Right.
And if it doesn't fit, I'm not the right person for you.
Conversation probably ended there, huh? I guess. I would imagine.
I mean, and I was just being upfront with people, and that's what I try to tell coaches when I'm trying to recruit them. This is who we are. This is what we try to believe in. These are our values, and this is the way we'll go about how we do our business. And if it's something that you don't relate to that, well, then that's probably not the right position for you or at school for you. And it's the same thing for me. I don't want to be placed put in a situation with their values are so misaligned with my values. And I think an individual, as far as values, I think values are through the maturation process. We're all a product of our environment, and we're a product of our heredity. And so as we grow up, we begin to develop our values. And then as time goes on, we begin to test them, and then we begin to tweak them. And then and as time goes on, we begin to see what's dear to us. And that's a process that's ongoing. I think in the development of a leader or of a young person, what does that person think that's important in life? What does he or she stand for? What do they represent?
Right.
And I think this is imperative that you, and then you have to live by them. It's something that I can't ask other people as a leader in an organization. I can't ask other people to do things that I'm not willing to do. That, to me, that's very, very important. And so as the leader, you have to have the strong values to be able to make sure that you do the things that you say you're going to do.
Right. Exactly. I wonder, I've talked to a number of different leaders, and people have a variety of ways of making sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of understanding what either words or sentences or terms mean when you establish core values for an institution or for an organization you're leading. Did you have a way of, I don't know if it was onboarding, maybe when you got somewhere, to make sure everybody understood and was speaking the same language in terms of the culture you created at the institutions you were?
I don't think there's any question in what I have done. What I valued was very important. I had 8 components of what a successful program was, and those were my values. And when I spoke to an institution about possibility of becoming their athletic director, I made sure they understood them. Mm-hmm. And then when I hired a coach, I made they understood, because I didn't want to put a round peg in a square hole. And so when I became the athletic director to every institution, what I would do is every year, annually, we would talk about our what a successful program, what are our values, what's important. And then what I did was a little unique. I would tie the evaluation of a coach in the athletic department based on those values.
Okay.
And they're all measurable. And so it's like graduating student athlete. That's a value that's very, very important to graduate your young people, to represent your institution the proper way, reflecting the values of it. So I always had a measurement thing within the NCAA rules. And so all of those were tied into the evaluation of a coach. So they knew, they understood, they were aware of what we were trying to do as an athletic department. and it was measurable, and they were recognized by. We didn't give cost of living increases. We gave merit-based, and the merit-based was based on our values.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So the evaluation was all based on these core values that you put in place. So people knew
All based
what it takes
based
to
on
be
the core
successful.
values.
Right.
Yes, that's correct.
That's excellent. I think back to when I had the conversation with Dutch, and he told me, about the purpose, a simply stated statement, which explains why an organization exists. When I came up with the purpose for what I was doing over at the American Football Coaches Association, he said, now that you have that, every decision you make with regard to your department, the education department in the AFCA, you needed to see if it helped answer that question. And so that kind of brings me to my next definition or set of statements here that I want to run by you and get your input on. It's about decisions, right? The first one is all decisions should help further the organization's purpose. And the second part is all decisions should be aligned with the organization's core values. And I think that ties to what you talked about in terms of evaluating people, evaluating what you're doing, but also evaluating decisions that you've made, you're going to make, or that you're making in the current moment. What do you think about that?
Well, no, I think that's why I tried to have. That's why I'm more of a black and white kind of person.
Right.
I'm more of a measurable kind of person. This is the way you can measure. Now, there's some of the values that we felt that we had were not as measurable as some of the others, but it's all tied in together. And I think that way, everybody. It's like not everybody in the department is going to put their oar in together. But if you got a lot more putting their oar in together than are not, then you have a better chance to be able to reach your potential. And that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to be in sync with everything else. Now, you have individuals and everybody's different, but at least you have a standard to refer back to. And sometimes in an athletic department, you need to go back there because sometimes people either forget it or they want to forget it or whatever. And so you've got to constantly reiterate what are your values that reflects what is the culture that you have. And I think it's constant reinforcement, or there are some situations that you need to have further in-depth conversation to make sure that maybe there's some situations where people haven't maintained reflected the values, and you may need to go back and have more discussions about it.
Right.
It's constant tweaking.
Ongoing process.
It's simple, but when you're dealing with a lot of people, everybody's different, and so therefore they interpret things a little bit differently. So sometimes it takes extra work to be able to get them, everybody on the same sheet of music.
Right. Lastly, culture, the behaviors and beliefs characteristic of an organization. And I think everything leads towards defining your culture, right? The purpose, the core values, and they all help to define the culture. And like you mentioned before, the culture at VMI was probably completely different than the culture at TCU, which was completely different than the culture at South Carolina, and on and on and on. Talk to me a little bit about culture.
Well, culture, you're exactly right. Culture was different every place, and I'll give you an example. I'll give you a couple of examples. Well, when I got to South Carolina, there were some things that circulated around. I mean, they didn't believe in themselves.
Oh, wow.
And they had a lot of the fans wait till next year, or the chicken curse. And I hated to hear those kind of things by the fans. And I think when I left there, one of the most exciting things, it just internally, was I never heard that anymore. I didn't hear wait till next year or the chicken curse or something like that. And so what you have to do is you want to get the people, if they think they can, they can. But if you don't think you can, you won't. And I'm afraid that it was more of they were down on themselves and they didn't believe in themselves. So it's a matter of getting them to believe in themselves and taking the necessary steps to get them into that direction or headed in that direction. And what I always said, you got to make every day a little bit better, a little bit better. So now, if we're talking about the culture of South Carolina, academically, they're very proud of what they're accomplishing. They're putting out young people that are making contributions to society. They're doing a wonderful job. And so those are the kind of things that you've got to change. You don't want to go in and say, I want to change the culture, but you've got to understand what the culture is, and then you got to determine what people want, and then you start to build yourself in that direction. And I know that at South Carolina, I asked them, what coach, athletically, what do you want to do? Where do you want to be? And they said the board said they wanted to be top 25. So we made a roadmap to get us there. Well, there was issues of consternation to get there. And, some of the board members began to get tight sneakers. So I went back to the board and I said, talking about the culture, I said, what do you want? Do you want to be top 50 or do you want to be top 25? I was basing decisions on top 25. And listen, I said it'd be a lot easier for me to be top 50 than top 25. No,
Exactly.
They reaffirmed that they wanted to be top 25 because we went through some difficult times as people that were familiar with the South Carolina program. We didn't have the financial latitude that some other people, so we had to do things a little bit differently than what had been done before. And I think in time it paid off. So if you look at the schools, if you look at South Carolina, the culture, we didn't have a lot of money to work with, but you look at A&M and they had a lot of financial flexibility at A&M, but financial flexibility doesn't necessarily make success.
Right.
And there are other tangible and intangible things that go into it. So you've got to assess what the culture is and be able to understand some of the things that you've got to be able to do where you got to move the program to where people begin to believe in themselves and the culture represents what the values of the university are.
Right. And I guess depending on the situation, you establish the core values pre-understanding the culture or understand the culture, then establish the core values and move forward like that. I guess it just depends on where you are in terms of order of operation. There's probably no set formula for identifying these things. Now, the purpose should probably be defined right off the bat or maybe defined even before you arrive there. That probably doesn't change much in terms of athletics on an academic campus, but in terms of values and core values and the culture, it's all an assessment before you start laying things out.
Yeah, you want to go and find out what the purpose is, and most of the places that hadn't really gone down and defined it. And then we worked to develop the core values. So, they all have values, but then what are common values? And you go back to the different schools. Well, VMI was different.
Right.
Their values were different than any other school I've been, and that was VMI. And obviously the military component, the academic component, and the athletic component was different than, say, at Miami of Ohio because there was no military.
Right.
So you had to make adjustments based on that. And that's what we were able to do at VMI, and that's what we were able to do at all the other schools. But I think it's very important that you articulate and you get people to buy into it so their fingerprints are on the purpose that you have as an athletic department, and they have their fingerprints on what are their core values, what do they stand for, what do they represent.
Right.
And that's how they go about doing their business.
Right. And as an institution, they may hire you to establish these things. They may hire you to set these things straight. This has been a really good conversation, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're quite welcome, and it's good to visit with you. And I'm not saying that I did everything right. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not, and there were mistakes that were made along the way, just like when you're beginning to develop your values along the way. And but then once you develop them, and you're that's your values, and then you want to try to maintain them. And for the athletic directors today, it's a very challenging time because there's so much pressure on them, and they're so visible with social media, but they've got to stick to their values. And even though it may not be most popular sometimes, but they stick to their values and they'll win out in the long term.
Real quick before we end here, that brings up a good point. There are almost, from the outside looking in, you would sometimes think there are a set of ghost values because the pressure and the decisions sometimes are made thinking about the bottom line, to where the ghost values are probably not the same as someone's stated core values. And you're right, to stay centered, to focus on those core values is probably very hard to do, but a very important thing to do when you're in a position like the athletic director.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's the challenge today. The athletics has got to be such a visible entity that you have a lot of people, board members, presidents, they all want to be associated or be visible because they see how it can help an institution. And unfortunately, sometimes you have sometimes people don't really understand how it works, and the athletic director's got a better sense, and sometimes you have those entities come in and and micromanage what you're trying to do,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
they don't understand exactly how it works, and it makes it very difficult for the athletic director to represent the values when there are people on the outside that have different values.
Right. Well, that makes for a tough environment. Eric, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you working with me and helping me try to understand and define some of these things here on the One Question podcast.
Well, hopefully I haven't made it too confusing.
You haven't. It's clear. It's very clear. That was Eric Hyman. He is the former director of athletics at schools such as VMI, Miami, Ohio, TCU, South Carolina, Texas A&M University, and he spent 47 years in college athletics, with 28 of those years leading an athletics department. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.